Now we've looked at the philosophical foundations to Stoicism. What we're going to do in this lesson is have a look at Greek Stoicism specifically. We're going to take an introductory look at the early forms of Stoicism in Athens from Zeno. We're then going to take a look at Zeno himself, his philosophy, the idea of the tripartite Stoic philosophy, and his influence from the Cynics and Plato. We're then going to move on to have a look at the rejection of Zeno's thought and the reforms made by Chrysippus. And then we're going to look at the sort of transition of Greek Stoicism into what it became by Posidonius, the Greek thinkers here. Okay, so as an introduction, the Greek Stoic phase spans relatively simply from the founding of the school by Zeno to the time of Posidonius. Our knowledge of this early form of Stoicism, really most of Stoicism, comes from a few main primary sources. One of those is the work of Cicero, who wasn't a Stoic himself, but provides a very good primary source for much of our knowledge of Stoicism today. Stoicism actually flourished in Athens during the classical period of ancient Greece into the Hellenistic period. And as a philosophy, Stoicism was primarily Socratic. So it was primarily based in the theories and ideas by Socrates. Now, I mentioned Socrates a little bit in the last video when we looked at the philosophical foundations, but I was more drawn to the idea of Stoicism being able to provide a middle ground between Aristotelian philosophy and the sort of Cynics. And the reason why I did that was because Socratic philosophy is really the father of all of the schools of thought, from the sort of Plato to Aristotle to Stoicism and to Cynicism. They all have some kinds of roots in Socratic philosophy. So to suggest that Stoicism is also Socratic is a pretty convincing argument. When it comes to the real founder of Stoicism, we've got to look at Zeno. So Zeno began his studies under the Cynic Crates, and it is for this reason that Stoicism was also heavily influenced by Cynicism. As we mentioned in the last video, Cynicism and Stoicism sort of sit on this spectrum almost, with Aristotelianism on one side, Cynicism on the other, and Stoicism almost sitting in the middle. This influence would be important all the way up to the philosopher Epictetus. And Zeno also studied under the polemics, from the academy, and also Stilpo as well from the Megarian school. And it's for this reason as well that Zeno's Stoicism can be seen as inspired by Socratic philosophy, but also a compromise between polemic and Stylipic philosophies, as well as a compromise between Aristotelian and Cynic philosophies. Stoicism sort of sits in a sort of centre of all of these kinds of ideals. So when it comes to Zeno's, one of his main contribution to the Stoicism and Stoic philosophy is his idea of tripartite study. And it was Zeno who established the tripartite study of Stoic philosophy. This was a part of, it basically suggested that Stoicism, we can study Stoicism by studying three main areas. And this was ethics, logic, and physics. We're going to have a look at each of these individually in their own videos later on in the course. But we should just know for now that Zeno was the person that founded this idea of tripartite study. According to Stoicism, ethics took a very cynical approach. According to Stoicism, the universe is permeated by an active and a passive principle. We're going to talk about the active and the passive in lesson 4 or 5, I believe. Moreover, there was also a cosmic web of cause and effect that the Stoics believed in. That the idea of causation is a web, so that one thing causes multiple things, and they are all also in tandem causes within themselves. Okay. Logic under Stoicism, the idea of the study of logic, was actually a mixture between the formal logic that we would study in philosophy today, as well as the study of epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge and the study of how one obtains knowledge. Taking an epistemological position, the Stoics can be said to be quite empiricist and naturalistic philosophers. They take empirical evidence to hold true, and they look at the study of the natural world. So this effectively makes up all of what we would call the orthodox Stoicism. The basic principles of ethics from the Cynics, the Platonic understanding of the physics and the universe, and the study of formal logic and epistemology. So that's what we would take to be Zeno's understanding of Stoicism. What about the disagreements that came after Zeno? So following Zeno, there was a number of disagreements about the issues of Stoicism. Many would interpret the writings of Zeno in different ways. So for example, you'd have disagreements between the philosophers Cleanthes and Chrysippus. And this disagreement, one of the main disagreements was effectively about the unity of virtues, which was a theory that Zeno suggested. So Zeno had made the claim that each virtue had some kind of wisdom. And this could be interpreted in two different ways. And it was interpreted by these two philosophers in two different ways. So, on one hand, Cleanthes suggested that all virtues are in fact one and the same, that being wisdom. So all the virtues that we're going to talk about when we look at Stoic ethics are all the same thing, really, and they're all just part of this ideal of wisdom. Whereas Chrysippus thought that virtues were all part of a greater whole, as in they were all pieces of wisdom that need to be understood as a collective in order to be seen as true wisdom. So all the virtues collectively come together to form wisdom, not that all virtues are basically wisdom. There's slight differences between the two, and became known as the divide between unitary and pluralistic versions of virtues. So what about the Greek Stoics post-Chrysippus? Because Chrysippus was really a very influential reformer to Stoicism. What happened after that? Well, around 60 years after Chrysippus, there were two main figures in Greek Stoicism. We have Zeno of Tarsus, who is not the same Zeno that we talked about earlier, and we also have Diogenes of Babylon. And these contributions to Stoicism were less impressive than that of Chrysippus. However, they were still worth mentioning, bringing up their names in a video about Greek Stoicism. The main event that really took Stoicism to a different era and to a different dimensions was something that happened in 155 BCE, and this was the diplomatic efforts. So in 155 BCE, the three main schools in Athens, the Stoics, the Academics, and the Peripatetics, were sent to Rome to help with diplomatic efforts. The impact that the philosophers like Diogenes of Babylon made on the Roman people could not be understated. This was a significant event, and it was incredibly significant because it marked a period where the philosophical thought in general would shifted from Athens to Rome, and with that it took Stoicism. So we're going to look at Roman Stoicism in the next lesson, as we looked at here. So what these diplomatic efforts meant for philosophy is that all of the types of philosophies were picked up and debated and talked about in Rome, and they sort of we see a dying of the Greek philosophies at this point, and we start to see the move really of the dominance of the Roman Empire anyway, as we move from 155 BCE. And with that, like I said, came Stoicism went with it. So in the next lesson we're going to look at Roman Stoicism. We've covered the history of the Greek Stoics. Now we're going to look at the way the Romans picked up what the Greeks had left off and how they developed Stoicism themselves, because they did make a number of significant reforms.